think we all saw in the Euros as well, of people in general, how tired people were. You could see the level, you could see even in the people's faces how tired they were of football, if you can say it that way. And I think that's how it will be as well this season. Of course, not in the start, or maybe for some, because someone will not get a lot of vacation. But I think that's the way we're going now. I don't think we can be sharp in every single game. I think we can try, but it's difficult to be sharp if you play over 70 games.
Well, that's Erling Haaland talking to the press in New York on Manchester City's pre-season tour of the US. His comments come at a time when the longest season in club football is up and running. City, of course, played in the Community Shield against Manchester United last weekend, and their last game of this season could be the 13th of July next summer if they reach the Club World Cup final.
So just to put this into context, the top players from Man City and Real Madrid in particular are going to play a full domestic season this year with an expanded Champions League. They've got an expanded 32-team World Club Cup next summer, another full domestic season, and then a 48-team World Cup. And you did a piece, Mark, this week about that. And a pretty simple question, really. Is football a breaking point?
Well, I mean, that's an answer which is different no matter who you ask. If you ask FIFA, they think there's plenty of room in the calendar for additional games. They say that the Club World Cup next year is basically taking the slot that was occupied by the Confederations Cup, which people might have forgotten, but it was an 8-team national tournament prior to the World Cup, which it doesn't really fit a 32-team club tournament replacing an 8-team international tournament. Well, the reality is, I think the killer stat for me is that Erling Haaland's season this year, if they get to the Club World Cup final, Man City, will be 354 days long. I mean, so basically, don't have to do the math. That's just short of a year. That is a long, long time. Now, I've spoken to people who are close to Haaland. They say that he's looking forward to it. But his quotes that we just heard then suggest he's a little bit concerned. That burnout is a key issue. Now, again, FIFA will point to the fact that the actual calendar for clubs hasn't really changed that much over 20 years in terms of leagues and cups. It's the pre-season friendlies, which you guys know all about. You've been over to the US. We've all been on these tours in the past. And these do add to the calendar, but the reality is it's a bigger Champions League. In England especially, you've got 2 domestic cups. You've got the expanded, well, it's not an expanded Club World Cup. You've got Club World Cup, which is new to the calendar, 32 teams. Seems ridiculous. Add on to that, you've got international games as well, which we're not even kind of taken into account. So for Haaland, it's Mbappe as well, and I think Mbappe could play 75 club games for Real Madrid. Now, he's not going to play all those games, but he still has to be in the mindset to play those games. The clubs, Carlo Ancelotti has to be prepared to select a squad or a team for those games. So there's just a few stats that I was given by people involved in this. Jude Bellingham, during the Euros, he celebrated his 21st birthday. By the time he was 21, he had played 18,837 minutes as a player. David Beckham, 3,929. So almost 5 times more minutes as a 21-year-old than David Beckham. Vinicius Jr. at 24, 344 games in his career. By the same stage at 24, Ronaldinho had played 162. So there's no doubt that football has now been asked to play many more games at a much higher intensity. And I do think that burnout's an issue. I spoke to fans, I spoke to agents, I spoke to the PFA, I spoke to lots of people in this piece, and people have different ideas. But I think from my perspective, the game is overheating fast.
Well, the problem is it comes down to greed. It's simply greed, and the players are the ones that are caught in the middle of it, really, because it's the organisations that all want their piece of the pie and expanding it year on year. It reminds me of, that scene in Breaking Bad where Skylar takes Walt to that storage facility and she pulls off the cover and there's this massive pile of money, and she says to him, "How big does this pile have to be?" And you do sort of think somebody needs to ask that question of FIFA and UEFA and these big organisations that are, that make so much money. The last revenue cycle, FIFA's money, I think the revenue was $7.5 billion. It's projected to go up to something like 11 in the next revenue cycle. How much do they need? At what point do we say, actually, we don't need to prioritise making more cash here. We need to prioritise the protagonists' welfare and well-being, which of course is the players.
Well, I don't think that'll ever happen, will it? You're talking there about protecting players. It seems to me that there's a couple of options. Either the players unite and say, right, we're going to go on strike, we're not happy with the workload and we're not going to turn up for these games, which would probably force meaningful change because you can't have a game without the players. Or the governing bodies introduce something. I know you mentioned in your piece about what they do in some American sports, in particular the NBA, where they do load management and say, a player can only play this amount of games. The problem with that is that you get a situation like you've had with Messi and Inter Miami, where people have bought tickets for games and he's not turned up because he's not fit or he's been rested, and all hell breaks loose. People want refunds because they've not seen the guy that they've bought the ticket to see. Without either one of those things, meaningful change isn't going to happen. And we're going to be sat here probably in a year or 2 or 5 or 10 talking about a calendar that's even more full now.
The problem is, because everybody has their own vested interest, it's going to require probably legislation to actually arbitrate this in a way that doesn't serve somebody's interest above somebody else's. And where I think what's quite interesting about this is that the union's case that they brought to the European Commission, so that's been brought by one of the guys who's working on that is Jean-Louis Dupont, who's actually in part of the legal team that won the Bosman case in '95, which obviously completely revolutionised the transfer industry. And I think the case that the European Commission has got to hear, I think what they want to do is they want a preliminary ruling on whether there's an interpretation of the EU law that basically requires employees, the players, to have their entitlement of an annual paid leave period. And surely that, as a fundamental principle, could actually be applied, which would mean that there has to be a 3 or a 4 week break that the players need to have every season, written into employment law, that would then stop a lot of this, let's fill the calendar with this, that and the other, and the players will fudge it and they'll come back and just carry on. But it's going to require, I think, legal intervention. And I do think that preliminary ruling is going to be quite important, and it will set the tone for what comes next, because if it does come down effectively in the players' favour, there's not a lot that FIFA and UEFA can argue back against that.
Well, I spoke to Maheta Malongo at the PFA chief exec, and he said that, I asked him, can you rule out strike action? And he said, absolutely not. They cannot discount strike action. Now, players on strike, I don't think we're close to that, but it's a possibility, and it's happened in the NBA in the past. It's happened in the NFL where players have had lockouts and they've fought for rights, but I don't know. I mean, I just don't sense right at this moment that the players are in that place, because, players just want to earn the money. At the end of the day, they only play want to earn money. But I do think that one thing that Maheta said to me was that they are really keen for a maximum number of games to be implemented, between 50 and 60 a season. They want to be led by the science. And that involves as well a maximum of 6 back-to-back games. Now, what a back-to-back game is classed as, it's 2 games in 72 hours. That player should do no more than 6 on the bounce. Now, a lot of the times, players are in the game to earn money, and they're in the game to be successful. But I think what we have to accept in this is that, forget about Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo. They're just completely on a different level. But I think we may have to accept the likes of Bellingham and Haaland, maybe these players will be superstars for 10 years rather than 15, because they just cannot play at such a level for so long. And I do find a little bit at times that some of the managers can be quite disingenuous about this, saying that there are too many games, and blame the TV companies, blame the owners, because the club owners and chief execs, the people that are largely silent on this, but they're the ones that are signing the contracts to play these extra games. They want more money, they want more games, more revenue. It kind of harks back to the Super League situation.
I was just going to say, the Super League sort of sits underneath all of this in the background, doesn't it? Just, that was the manifestation of a lot of clubs complaining about the lack of revenue, less so in the Premier League, because obviously that is just an outlier in terms of the money that it generates, but obviously the Premier League clubs jumped aboard the train. The 6 of them eventually joined it, but that was being driven by those sides who are going to be find the appeal of more games greater because of their revenue streams. I
just wonder at some point, will a big player, a superstar player, a Bellingham, an Mbappe, a Haaland, be bold enough to say, yeah, I'm going to sign for you, but I'm going to play 50 games a season?
I don't see that ever happening, because you've got top players who want, with the best will in the world. I know, like Rafael Varane, hasn't he, recently, or relatively recently, said that the schedule was too much. But all these players still want their appearance bonuses. They still want to be paid to play. Yeah. You've got managers like Pep Guardiola who sit in front of the press and go, there's too many games, the schedule's nuts. But he refuses to have a bigger squad of players because he wants to keep a tight squad of players, and doesn't really want to rotate his players and bring in kids, because he knows if he brings in kids he might lose a game, and then the criticism will heap on. So it's all very well saying all these things, the players, the owners, the managers, whatever. It's another thing entirely actually doing something about it.
And what happens if we limit players to 50 games a season, for instance, and Haaland by mid-April has played 47, and he's got a Champions League final to come up, he's got a Premier League decider, and he's got, maybe an FA Cup final. Then what happens? But this is squad management. But you're right, Pep Guardiola and Jurgen Klopp, 2 managers that really call for extra subs, barely use them. So I can understand why FIFA at some points are saying, look, it's not just on us, on FIFA, because these managers have asked for this, they haven't taken advantage of it. I mean, just going back to the pre-season tournament point, pre-season tours, I did my first pre-season tour in 2006 with Man United. We went to South Africa, and it was just after the World Cup in 2006. And just to give you an idea of how much things have changed, it was a 3-game tournament over 10 days. I think they played Orlando Pirates, Kaiser Chiefs, and the winner of the Orlando Pirates Kaiser Chiefs game. And the press back was 6. There was 6 of us there. Now, the press box is probably 60 or 100. There's written media, there's TV, there's YouTube, there's social media, there's everything. So the appetite for the game, from us, from everybody, from fans, is even bigger and bigger. So the pre-season element of it has grown incredibly over that time. I think you probably remember this. Arsenal would never go on a pre-season tour. They went to Austria under Arsene Wenger. 2-week tour of Austria, play, prepare. His idea was Arsene Wenger was, I want my players to prepare as best as possible. Now, we've seen over the time, I think Chelsea one year under Jose Mourinho had 4 weeks away, came back completely unready for the season. He lost his job, I think, mid-season. Erik ten Hag has complained about situations like that. I think last summer United had a very kind of gruelling summer tour to the US, and last season they had 45 injuries, Man United, more than anybody else. And they started this season with injuries as well. So, you have to wonder whether we're looking at the wrong issue, but there are too many games, full stop.
Just to sum up how silly this argument can be at times. You've got City, we talked about City and how their season could be so long. They're going to play in that World Club Cup at the end of this coming season. Pep Guardiola sat in front of the media and was asked specifically a couple of weeks ago, well, does that mean that if you're going to play in this World Club Cup, you're not going to go on a US tour to prepare for the next season? And he went, well, I can't say that, because the club needs the money and we need to play the games to rate. And, it's the Premier League got these PSR rules. We need to make money to buy players and stuff. So something that the clubs can actively do. City could go to Austria and just chill out for 2 weeks before the season, play a couple of behind closed doors games, but they won't.
The answer to that, what I've been told, is that we don't know what the prize money is yet with this FIFA competition. We don't know what the venues are because it's still being talked about. But apparently the prize money is going to be so big. You're talking maybe £80 million a club, certainly the big clubs, that they won't need to go to the US on tour, because the money they will make on this Club World Cup was so big that they will have a pre-season. But to your point about players having the right to a break, when I spoke to the PFA about this, they're saying, yes, players are entitled to 3 weeks off. But 3 weeks off isn't finish one day and 3 weeks later play your next game. It's 3 weeks off completely, and then you return to pre-season. As we've seen in the summer, I think Rasmus Højlund is a case in point. He played his last game for Denmark less than 4 weeks before his first game for Man United, and guess what? He's injured.
Well, quite a few. I mean, Harry Kane was always quite famous at Spurs for coming back early, and that 3 week, I think the 3 week, well, I was going to call it a rule, but it's sort of a guideline, and players, if they want to, can come back earlier. And obviously there's that, again, it comes back to self-interest, because there'll be managers who'll be saying, well, look, I'm not suggesting that Harry Kane was put under pressure to come back, but I'm sure there will be players who have been told, look, we don't need you. We don't need, I won't name the manager, but there was a manager who's talked about this pre-season, and the way he frames it is this. He says, I want players who come back who are prepared to play, not preparing to prepare to play. And that's the difference now with pre-season. They want people who come back to pre-season ready. They don't want to use it as a period to get ready.
Guardiola made that point. He said, I want players psychologically to want to touch the ball. He made that point, didn't he, in the US, that I don't want my players coming back mentally drained. So some players said we will start the season slowly because the players aren't ready to come back. They need to come back when
it'll be interesting to see what happens with City, particularly at the start of this season, because City have made the decision with the England players, and Rodri obviously played in that final, the Euros final as well, to give them an extended break. Didn't have them back before the Community Shield and said, come back this week and then start to get ready. United chose to do it differently and brought Mainu and people back, and they played in the Community Shield. It'll be interesting to see how City start the season without probably Walker and Foden and Rodri at full speed, whether they start to drop points early on, and then what Pep says about the rest that he's given his players. Because I imagine that he, in an ideal world, would have liked his players back 10 days ago to play half an hour in the Community Shield to be ready to play Chelsea on that first day. But as it stands now, they're not going to be ready.
One other area that this could move into, which I know Mikel Arteta is on the record talking about this. I think it's quite an interesting idea, is the idea that 25-man squads are insufficient now for this, and that actually you're going to need to go to 28 or maybe 30
Chelsea are already there.
Well, Chelsea can play twice, but the idea that you are restricting squads to 25 members, but you're expanding the games that those 25 players are asked to play, is actually now incompatible with the modern calendar. And I think that there is a debate to be had there. You're accepting defeat in terms of trying to limit the number of matches. But if this is where we're going, and there is no arbitration on this in terms of drawing a line and saying, look, we are going to stop the number of games here, limit the number of matches that a player can play, then actually where else do you go other than saying, well, all right, we move from 25 to 28?
But this gets back to Arteta being a manager who's been disingenuous. I was at the Arsenal-Luton game last season where that was the one game where he changed his team, because prior to that and after that, for the running, he basically kept the same team.
Oh, well, but
because he wouldn't change his players.
He's on the record as sort of contradicting himself to some extent to say that I actually would ideally like to work with 18 or 20, a bit like Guardiola does. I only want the sort of the interchangeable players. That's a tight-knit group. There's an issue at Arsenal's academy at the moment. They've lost a couple of significant talents this summer to players, to clubs that are offering game time. And that is an issue because Arteta's not shown a great track record of trusting those kids to come through. So you're right, there is maybe a bit of a double standard there going on. But just on this point of games and expanded calendars, I do think that the squads are probably going to have to go up to accommodate it.
I don't think that Pep would even... If someone said to Pep, right, you can have 30 players in your squad, I just don't think he would do it. I think he would make the point that we just mentioned there about having a tight-knit group. He doesn't want players, maybe number 28, 29, 30 who are playing 5, 6, 7, 8 games a year, potentially causing trouble in the dressing room because they're sat there not playing every week on the bench. It's an issue that he's got to deal with. I think if you told him that you could have 30 players in your squad, he would still have around sort of 22, 23 of a core group. Because it goes back to the point that we made right at the start of this, that everyone wants to make sure that their own little area is safe, and Pep wants to win games with the best team possible every single week.
Pep's an interesting one because you're right in all that you said, but the way he's looked after Phil Foden, when everyone was screaming, give him games, he said, no, he'll play when he's ready. To the point where Phil Foden's now 24, 25, and he's one of the best players in the world, because Pep's managed him so well. I think you look at other players of a similar age. I think Marcus Rashford's a little bit older, but you could say that Rashford played so much at Man United that he kind of flatlined and he hasn't really found an uptick. Well, Foden's, trajectory's been upwards all the way, and you have to credit Pep with that. But the flip side is Man City have got such a great squad, they can do that.
Well, because Foden's competing with Mahrez, with Grealish, with
doesn't need to play
Silva,
every week.
with Gabriel Jesus when he was
and
there.
Also,
all of those.
You've got to credit Foden as well in that he sat there and listened to Pep and decided that was the best way to go. And you've got a situation a year ago with Cole Palmer, probably in exactly the same situation where Pep was saying, you're going to play, but you're not going to play every week. And he went, well, I'm going to Chelsea and to play every week. Obviously, that move has worked out for him. But it relies on the young player to sit there and go, well, yeah, all right, that's the right way to do it.
I mean, we've spoken about areas that can be, brought in to help, ease the problem. We talked about reducing games or having limits to games. I mean, I suppose from an English perspective, there are so many competitions. I mean, we still have the Carabao Cup, which has two-leg semi-finals, which is an absolute nonsense, really, because you get to January, the busiest time of the year after the Christmas break, and you're playing two semi-finals. So I think within the game itself, there is an onus for them to look at it more closely. One of the lines in the piece, I spoke to Professor Chris Brady, who's is into sports business, and he's analysed the situation with the crossover between business and sport. And he mentioned a phrase called co-opetition, which is cooperation and competition coming together. And he believes that down the line, the resolution to this will be FIFA, UEFA, the Premier League, all the big leagues will at some point find a solution, a common ground. And this could be Super League by stealth in many ways, whereby each of them has too much to lose by not agreeing to come to a compromise. They have to find a common ground. And whether that's 3, 4, 5 years away, FIFA wants to be involved in the club game, that's where the money is. The clubs want more money. The fans want to see high-end quality. So at some point, there will be an area where everyone comes together. I don't see it right now, but I suppose that Arsene Wenger's point when he came up with this new calendar idea 2 or 3 years ago is that the football calendar we have right now dates back to the 1930s. That's how old it is, and it's not fit for purpose. So the whole element of stakeholders, the players, the owners, the clubs, the organisations, the confederations have to find a way to come together to make it all work for everybody.
It's hard to see it. This is why I come back to the legislation argument, because it's hard. If you just take domestically, for example, and the English calendar here, the only organisations that have given any ground there really is the FA with scrapping because they're the weakest.
And look how that went down.
Yeah. but they've scrapped replays. They've obviously scrapped. They've done what they could do with their competition, effectively their flagship competition, the FA Cup. The Premier League. Look, we all know the Premier League is not. Yes, there's a chief executive. Yes, there's a sort of board structure there. But the Premier League is not anything other than the clubs.
Yeah.
There's not leadership there. This is and so the clubs when they meet, when the 20 shareholders meet, they're all looking out for themselves, and it just feeds down right from the top, right from FIFA all the way down to the individual leagues. It's all self-interest, which is why we've not had a situation where the independent regulator's been agreed. We've not had a funding deal for the EFL from the Premier League to satisfy everybody, because everybody wants their own piece of the pie.
And that shows you, that point you just made, that shows how difficult all of this is, because Klopp in particular with those 12:30 kickoffs, for example, the clubs all sign those off. Klopp sits in front of the media and goes, "I can't believe we're playing at 12:30 again."
Yeah, the owners.
Your club has agreed to play at 12:30. You're not. Who are you shouting at? You're not shouting at the broadcast company. You're not shouting at the kickoff time. You're shouting at your own club. They've sat in a room and agreed to the kickoff time that you hate, and that just shows you've got two massive personalities in one club, basically arguing against each other.
And why do they have the 12:30 kickoff time? For the global TV rights?
Look, money decides all this. I think the nightmare scenario for fans of the game itself is that Saudi Arabia or Qatar will create a live-style situation in football where they will pay an inordinate amount of money to all the big clubs, all the confederations, that everyone gets a slice of the pie. It makes them all happy. The fans won't be happy, but the fans often don't really count in the decisions that are made at the top. And I think that's where I see it going, maybe in 4 or 5 years' time, whereby maybe football becomes like the NFL with a commissioner that runs it in that sense. It's something that a lot of fans will not want to comprehend or even contemplate, but I do think we have to brace ourselves for that kind of massive change, because there's too much money, there's too many big organisations, there's too many big clubs, big owners that want the same thing.
The Live point is a really good one, because obviously the money that Live put into golf attracted all these top golfers. But the one thing that a lot of golfers said the reason why they moved is because they went from 3 rounds on Friday, Saturday, Sunday rather than 4. And they said they wanted to play less golf for more money.
More games for more money. There you go.
But then if a player's given that opportunity, like if a league in, I don't know, Dubai or Saudi Arabia takes off and says, we're going to play 40 games, but you're still going to get paid the same money. In fact, you're going to get paid a lot more. It's a no-brainer, isn't it?